Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The same activities that would degrade an elevated person do not cause fall down for those who are already fallen. Indeed, one who is lying on the ground cannot possibly fall further. The material association that is dictated by one's own nature is considered a good quality. Purport: the Lord here further describes the ambiguity in ascertaining material piety and sin. Although intimate association with women is most abominable for a renounced sannyasi, the same association is pious for a householder who is ordered by Vedic injunction to approach his wife at the suitable time for procreation. Similarly, a brahmana who drinks liquor is considered to be committing a most abominable act, whereas a Shudra, a low-class man who can moderate his drinking, is considered to be self-controlled. Piety and sin on the material level are thus relative considerations. Any member of society, however, who receives diksha, initiation into the chanting of the Lord's holy names, must strictly obey the four regulated principles: no eating of meat, fish or eggs, no illicit sex, no gambling, and no intoxication and no gambling. A spiritually initiated person neglecting these principles will certainly fall from his elevated position of liberation. Interesting discussion, a seemingly paradoxical discussion, that throughout the Vedic literature there are various regulations which are meant to protect one from sinful life and to engage one in pious activities. Lord Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, pravritim cha nivritim cha janana vidura suraha. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Tasmat shastram pramanante karya karya vivastaho gyatva shastra vidhanotam kartam karma iharhasi. Now one should know what is right and what is wrong, what is to be done and what is not to be done, according to the Vedic injunctions, and act accordingly. But here, Krishna seems to be speaking more like what in modern terms we call like a New Age pundit. There's no real difference between right and wrong. Is that what Krishna is saying? No, that's not what Krishna is saying. There is a difference, but the understanding is quite subtle. And this, what is right and what is wrong can be quite subtle. What is right ultimately? Ultimately, the only thing that is right is to do what is pleasing to Krishna. Even that may be very difficult to understand. Mother Yashoda, she's totally dedicated to pleasing Krishna. That's why she put him down when she was feeding him, thinking that she'd left the milk on the boil, because she was boiling the milk for Krishna. So Krishna became angry, and he wasn't pleased. But still Mother Yashoda, every time she does it, again and again and again, Damodar Leela, all these pastimes are going on and again and again and again. Then she ties up Krishna. That doesn't seem very pleasing to Krishna. But he's protesting. And he protests by dragging the mortar and pulling down the trees. So what is pleasing to Krishna? That may be also difficult to ascertain. Anyway, that's on a very high level. But the principle is that one should act in a way that is pleasing to Krishna. And that is described in Shastra also. In fact, even just to follow the principles of Shastra without even even if one's not on a very high level of Krishna consciousness, just to follow the directions of Shastra, that is considered to be at least a preliminary stage of pleasing Krishna. Not to follow means that one is defying Krishna, the order that he's given for the world. But then one has to understand the principle of Shastra also. The rules and regulations that ultimately meant everything is directed toward pleasing Krishna. But not everyone is on that platform. Therefore there are different rules for different people on different levels. Here the example is given that intimate association with women is most abominable for a renounced sannyasi. But for a grihasta, it's stated in Shastra that it is sinful not to approach his wife at the time which is suitable for her to beget a child. That's also under certain regulations, that there should be some gap after her delivering a child, for instance. And there are certain rules and regulations how to do that, but it's a duty of the grihasta to approach his wife to give her children. That is considered the duty, not considered, that's stated to be a duty of the householder to give children to his wife. So what is right for one person in one situation will be wrong for another person in another situation, and it becomes, but everything is ultimately aimed at bringing people closer to Krishna. The sannyasi, he's renounced the world, understanding that everything in this world is temporary and miserable. We have to come to the spiritual platform. The householder, and he hasn't realized that, but or even if he may have realized it, he still has to perform his duty as a householder to set an example for the benefit of those who haven't realized it. So he approaches his wife with the aim of begetting children, all for the same ultimate purpose, that himself and others should come to the platform of detachment from this world and attachment to Krishna. So the idea of the Vedic injunctions, which allow one to enjoy this world under regulation, are to bring one to the platform of detachment from it, so that one ultimately may become closer to Krishna. And apart from each individual person's journey toward Krishna, there is also consideration of the benefit of all other jivas also. That the householder, for instance, he may have developed a sense of detachment from this world, but nevertheless, he may procreate children for the reason. One reason is again to give an example, to show a good example to others, that they shouldn't neglect their duties because they're troublesome. Householder life is undoubtedly very troublesome, but nevertheless, one is enjoined to take that responsibility. Those who are not fully renounced and ready for the life of renunciation, they should take that responsibility and bring children into this world for the sake of training them in Krishna consciousness, for begetting good population is the term or the phrase that Srila Prabhupada used. So one has to consider the good of others also, not only one's own good. Exactly what one should do in a certain situation, there are so many factors involved that it is required to take some guidance. There are pros and cons. Vishwanath Chakravarti, he in one writing, I believe that's in his Madhurya Kadambini, he describes the mind of a family man, a married man, who's vacillating between renouncing and remaining in householder life, and he thinks, well, I should leave my home. Everything here is, everything in this world is simply temporary. I should renounce. And then he thinks, well, no, actually, better I execute my household duties. But then, what is the use of all this? I should simply go to the forest and leave behind all this Maya. And then, but what if maybe better I stay because, what if I'm not strong enough to maintain that vow? And in this way his mind goes back and forth. So such a person requires a guru to guide him and tell him, look, you just do this. Okay. And what should a person in that situation be advised to do? Well, I always say that, generally I say if we don't have so much householders thinking about renunciation, it would be better if they did think about renunciation sometimes. But more often we find brahmacharis thinking about entering householder life. And then if they say, well, I'm thinking about it, should I or shouldn't I? Generally I say, if you're thinking about it, you better go that way. Because if you're thinking about it, then you're not a proper brahmachari anyway. Just the best thing is, like I wrote in my brahmachari book about the point of getting married. So I said, for a brahmachari, if you think of getting married, stop thinking about it. Just don't. And then the problem's finished, right? Then you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it at all. So the best thing is, if you think about getting married, just stop thinking about it, and problem finished. But if you go on thinking about it, then thinking, feeling, willing, one thing leads to another. There was this Vishwakarma, I believe it was. He was one of the Canadian temple presidents, and he asked Prabhupada well, what is that for a brahmachari who's, what was that? Brahmachari is thinking of getting married, what should he do? And is that a fallen, I can't remember what the anecdote, I'm sorry, I forgot it. I had it in my mind, and maybe by the end of the class it'll come back. So, what is piety and what is sin? This is the consideration. It may be very difficult to ascertain, and we find especially Mahabharata and also Ramayana is just one after another. There are narrations which are paradoxical, in as much as all kinds of things are going on which might seem sinful, but they're not sinful. And Krishna is famously known as a liar, a politician, or who induced Yudhishthira to lie, as a politician who induced Bhima to kill Duryodhana by unfair means, who induced Arjuna to kill Karna by unfair means, who tricked the Kaurava warriors into thinking the day's over when it wasn't, and allowing Arjuna to rush through the Kaurava phalanx and find Jayadratha and kill him. So that's an interesting. Do you know that Arjuna had vowed to kill Jayadratha before the sunset? Otherwise, Arjuna would enter into fire. He vowed to do that. Either Jayadratha dies or Arjuna dies. So if Arjuna dies, well, that's great for the Kauravas, for the Kaurava army. So it was the sun was just going down, and Arjuna was fighting through so many warriors because Jayadratha went to the back of the army. And it was still so many warriors to go through, and the sun set. And the Kauravas were very happy that now Arjuna has to die. But then Krishna made the sun come up, or maybe it never set. And then Arjuna went through and got through and killed Jayadratha. Yeah. Yeah, I read it. It wasn't so clear to me. Maybe you should see the Sanskrit. But anyway, it's interesting that Krishna could have just made Jayadratha have a heart attack, or or have all the Kauravas fall asleep on the battlefield, or he could have. Krishna didn't need to do all that, but he created situations in which his devotees would get the credit for having won the battle. And he created situations. People accuse Krishna of being a liar, a thief, immoral politician. But Krishna himself created those situations in which he would appear to be so. And Krishna, apparently acting as an ordinary person, showed that in this world it's impossible to be completely pious according to the letter of the law. Therefore one should understand the spirit of the law. That if you want to be completely pious, what can you do? Maybe you should just go away and live in a cave in the Himalayas. As even today there are yogis doing that. They come out of the world so that they can be completely detached from it. But that in itself could be considered improper because one is neglecting his duties. That from one consideration that is there. And another thing is that even in that situation, you could get trapped by Maya and do the wrong thing, as happened to Bharat Maharaj. He left the world of Maya to go and live in the forest to do meditation. And then he saw, one day as he went to the river to drink water, he saw on one side of the river is a deer, a heavily pregnant deer. And on the other side is a tiger. The tiger roared and the deer had a miscarriage. And then and she died, the deer died, but the fawn fell in the water and Bharat Maharaj rescued that. And then out of compassion for the living being, he nurtured the fawn. So that's a nice thing. It's a good. What should you do? Just let it die? What would you do? Difficult to say. So then he nurtured the fawn who treated him as his mother, and the fawn was very affectionate to him. And then he felt, I can't abandon this fawn, and he left the whole world of affection so that he could develop his affection for Krishna, but then thinking to do the right thing and not abandon a newly born fawn that had no protection. He nourished it and nurtured it, and in the course of doing so, forgot Krishna. So, it's impossible in this world. This world is set up. It's the world of Maya. We can't run away from Maya wherever we go. And Maya is very complex. And she often presents situations which are very complex, and it may be difficult to know what's the right thing to do. And then in retrospect, everyone will give their opinion. That yes, you should have done this, you could have done that. But you don't know what's going to happen. You can't tell what's going to happen. Exactly. Whatever we do, how others will react, it's impossible to say. Especially when it's some controversial situation or some very tense situation. And that's one of the features of a good leader, is that he makes good decisions, means well considered. But if you just try to, well considered means you have just tried to see what will happen in future, but then you can't exactly predict what will happen. So what is good to do, what is not good to do, it's very difficult to say, but ultimately the criterion is not exactly the action itself, but the spirit in which it is done. It is done for the sake of pleasing Krishna, then it is proper. If it is not done for the sake of pleasing Krishna, then it is improper. And that doesn't mean one can do anything he likes and then say, well, I did it, I was thinking of Krishna. That and there's a pile of pots to clean, but I didn't clean them, but as I was not cleaning them, I was thinking of Krishna. But Krishna says, Ma manusmara yudhyacha. Think of me, all right, think of me, but fight also. Arjuna didn't want to fight, he wanted to go off and be a yogi and maybe think of Krishna in the forest. But Krishna said, very good, you think of me, very good idea, but fight also. Don't just think of me, you have to do your duty also. So in that case, if Arjuna had left the battle to become a yogi and think of Krishna, what does Krishna say? Krishna ultimately says to Arjuna, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mang namaskaro. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, bow down to Arjuna. He could say, great, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I'm going to go off and worship you and bow down to you and be a very good person. But wait a minute, remember what I said before? Ma manusmara yudhyacha. Don't just be my devotee, you have to fight also. So Arjuna understood that. If Arjuna had said, oh, all right, well, Krishna, you told me to bow down. Okay, I'm going to bow down before you. And, that's what you told me, right? Always think of me. All right, I'm going to think of you. But Krishna said, yeah, all right, think of me, but think of me and think what I told you also. You have to fight also. So yeah, the Mahabharata especially is full of all of they're called dharma sankata. That paradoxical situations. What is the correct thing to do? What is right? What is wrong? What should one do under certain circumstance? Krishna himself, as I many times told this story, I think I told it last time I was here also. Krishna himself told the story of the very pious Brahmana who vowed never to tell an untruth in his whole life, he had his cottage at the edge of a village, and just to the side of that was a copse. And one day a man came running up and said, help me, some bandits are chasing me. I'm carrying gold, some gold, they want to take my money. So the Brahmin said, you can just hide in that copse there. Yeah, you know that word, but you're saying for the sake of them. Yeah. They're all Americans? No? It means a wood, a small wood. Upavanam, you could say. A grove, a wood, forest. There are all kinds of synonyms. Jungle. You think of some more? Have an English class here. So the Brahmin said, okay, you go and hide in those trees. And a few minutes later, a gang came running up and said, hey, did you see a guy running? We're chasing him. He's got money. We've got gold. You want to steal it from him. So the Brahmin thought, well, I can't tell a lie. He said, well, he's in that copse there. So they went there, killed him, and took all his gold and said, thank you very much to the Brahmana. And the Brahmana maintained his vow. And at the end of life, the Brahmana went to hell. Because in that situation, even though he had made a vow never to tell a lie, he should have broken his vow, because the dharmic principle of protecting a person, an innocent person, is more important than the vow of a personal vow, and also it's more important than the principle of not telling a lie. So like this, there are so many instances. Vibhishana in Ramayana, he's wanted to be faithful to his brother. The duty of a younger brother is to be faithful to his older brother. No one in the modern society has even the slightest idea of what this could possibly mean. But eventually, after attempting to instruct Ravana. So many times he attended to instruct Ravana that what you're doing is not good. And eventually Vibhishana became a traitor and joined the forces of Rama in attacking Ravana. And that was the right thing for him to do. If he had not done so, if he had remained faithful to his brother, which is a very important principle, a major principle, which we see among the brothers of Lord Ramachandra, how they were so faithful. Bharat was so faithful to Rama, even though he was actually legally made the king of Ayodhya, but he refused to accept it, thinking that Rama is the elder brother. It's meant for him, this kingdom. So that very important principle, Vibhishana, he transgressed this principle for the higher principle of, from the worldly perspective, the higher principle of associating with and supporting the righteous and abandoning the unrighteous, and on the highest principle of recognizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead and serving Him even by transgressing all material dharma, which is of course the example of the gopis of Vrindavan also, who are worshipped throughout India as the most pious women who, from the external perspective, appeared to be the most impious. That they left their families at night and ran off to be with Krishna, to associate with someone who is not their husband. They abandoned their duty, their homely duties. But this is the topmost piety. So it's not that there is no distinction between piety and sin. That's not what Krishna is saying here. But that what is piety and what is sin, exactly to ascertain them may not be so easy. In general, it's fairly clear. Meat eating, gambling, intoxication, illicit sex, these are all sinful activities. But under certain circumstances, they're not. Meat eating, that is allowed under certain principles. That actually there was one conversation between the famous or infamous Dr. Patel, who used to argue with Srila Prabhupada on the beach in Bombay. And it sometimes got pretty animated. So Dr. Patel, anyone who knows anything about India knows that Patel is a Gujarati name. So he was arguing for the case of this Swami Narayan sect, which is quite prominent in Gujarat and is spreading out in different parts of the world. So he said that the Dr. Patel said that this meat eating is very bad because the Swami Narayan sect is completely against it. And Prabhupada said, no, it can be allowed under some. It's allowed in the Vedic culture under certain circumstances. Then Dr. Patel said, then we reject that, and then Prabhupada said, then you're an atheist. You're just like Buddha. Nindasi yagya vidher ahaha shruti jatam sadaya hridaya darshita pashu ghatam keshava dhrita buddha sharir jai jagadisha. Buddha is worshipped for having rejected the Vedas because people were misusing the Vedic injunctions to kill animals. So that's a special case. But if someone else rejects the Vedas, saying that they kill animals, therefore we reject. If the Buddhists do that, or any other, Buddha himself did that, but those who follow him become atheists, because meat eating is allowed. And for the Kshatriyas, under certain circumstances, they are allowed to eat meat. They're supposed to, not only they're allowed to, they're supposed to go into the forest and kill animals. and then bring the animals back, the ones that are suitable for sacrifice, and offer them in sacrifice, and in that circumstance they can eat meat. So they're supposed to kill the animals. One reason is so that to protect the rishis in the forest from ferocious beasts. Another is for practicing fighting, because when you go to a fight, it's fearsome. So you have to practice being in a fearful position. So where there's some tiger or elephant attacking, of course they don't kill elephants, but tiger, wild boars, they're attacking you, and it's a real life face-to-face situation where you're faced with a severe enemy who wants to kill you, and that's what it's like in battle. So you have to have some practice. And another thing is that you don't become squeamish in battle. Squeamish means you wet your pants. when you have to be ready to fight and not be afraid. So, and not when you see blood, to not be start vomiting and become nauseous, and you can't hold your bow anymore. You have to be hard-headed. That's required of a Kshatriya. Sometimes he has to administer capital punishment. Srila Prabhupada said that those who oppose capital punishment, they are atheists, because that's the law of the Shastra, that the capital punishment is required in some circumstances. So Kshatriyas, they have to kill, and sometimes they eat meat, that which is offered in sacrifice. And drinking, they're also allowed to drink under certain circumstances, and they're also allowed to engage in sexual activities which for others would be considered illicit. So what would be considered proper for one person may be considered improper for another. What might be considered proper in one circumstance is considered improper in another. What might be considered pious in one age is considered impious in another, just like in Kali Yuga. Devarena sutotpatim, one of the 5 activities which is forbidden in Kali Yuga, which is considered a pious activity in other yugas, is to beget a child in the womb of one's brother's wife. If the brother dies or is incapable of begetting a child in his wife's womb, then the brother should do so, but that's forbidden in Kali Yuga, because then it'll lead to so much misuse. So, that's not actually the subject of this verse, but it's of the general discussion that's going on in this section. In other words, although it's generally fairly clear to see what is sinful and what's not sinful, it can become very complex. So one should understand the underlying principle. It's required to understand the underlying principle. And because it's fairly complex, therefore there are brahmanas. It's another reason why there are brahmanas needed in society to give proper guidance in each circumstance. What is the proper thing to do? Because if you get it wrong, then you're in trouble. If you get it right, everything is clear. Therefore, brahmanas are required to people who understand the principles, who have the time and the disposition to study Shastra, to contemplate on its to contemplate on its purport, to be guided by wise persons who have themselves been guided by others, and to have seen the application of Shastra in day-to-day life, and who are thus competent to give guidance to others. It's required in human society. In the present time, everyone's just running around wildly, just with even the education is completely in the mode of passion. But it's required that there are some people who are deeply learned and contemplative, and who on the basis of understanding the nature of reality can give proper guidance to human society. The particular point in this purport, it's all that. Those activities that would degrade an elevated person do not cause fall down for those who are already fallen. We usually hear this proposition stated in the other way, that activities that are considered sinful are not sinful when performed by an elevated person. That if we see an elevated, just like Krishna himself, he's dancing with the gopis, he's not degraded by that. Lord Shiva drinks poison, so if anyone else, he's not degraded by taking intoxication. A highly elevated person, what is this? Jodi ama Nityananda Shurabari Jai Tatapio Shemo Nityananda Rai. Even if we see Lord Nityananda going into a wine shop, we should understand he's still the supremely elevated personality of Godhead. He doesn't become degraded by doing so. He must have some purpose for doing that. A sannyasi should not cross the water. A member of Varnashram society should not cross the ocean. You become fallen by doing so. It's stated in Shastra. Prabhupada did so, but he didn't become degraded. He made the other side of the water elevated. So he didn't fall down into that vortex of sin, but he picked people up from that. So whereas other Indians who went to the West, they almost all became fallen and degraded. But Prabhupada picked others up. So what is the normal rule it doesn't apply in the case of elevated people. And sinful activities, they don't cause fall down for some. How can you fall down if you're already fallen? It's not saying that sinful activities are good, but someone who's already fallen, then you can't say it's going to cause their fall down. So again, it doesn't mean that it's good, but it's not, for a sinful person to commit sin seems to be normal for him. If people, just like, people all over the world are having illicit sex, and it's just completely normal in modern society. And no one cares that much. But if someone who's supposed to be a highly elevated sadhu does so, then there's an outcry. Recently in India, there was a sadhu of sorts who goes by the name of Paramahamsa Nityananda, and he was caught on film embracing, and actually there were so many things before that, but somehow he managed to avoid the public. One newspaper once, they did an expose on him, of him anyway, but then his followers found out and they bought up all the copies of the newspaper before it went on the stands and paid the editor off not to, so that day people didn't get their newspaper. But anyway, it came out and there was a big uproar about it, about this Paramahamsa Nityananda embracing some Tamil film star and this and that. There's a big uproar, but so many people are doing that every day. But when someone who's supposed, even now today in India, when someone who's supposed to be a sannyasi behaves like that, it's considered extremely bad. And he was arrested, but it wasn't illegal, so they couldn't put any charges on him. But many of his followers left him, although some fanatics remain with him. So that which would have been just considered, well, it's just normal for someone else, was considered very bad for him. The problem is that when all these people, they go on doing this, eventually it comes to be accepted as normal, even for the person who's supposed to be saintly. And then there's no distinction seen between saintliness and sinfulness. Just like about 2 years ago in Croatia, a country in Europe. I was in a village area, and the parish priest came to see me. It's a Catholic country, the parish priest. So he was a youngish man, I guess, 30-something. And he came with his girlfriend. I mean, it's quite, attractive young woman with perfume and a short skirt. And I said to our host, shall I say something to him? Because it's just a little village. I don't want to destroy his public relations and all this. And he said, no, it's all right, leave it. So then afterward, I asked our host, a devotee, that, what do the people think about that? The parish priest is openly moving around with a Catholic priest. They're supposed to be celibate, yeah. Aren't the people disturbed by that? And he said, no, they just say, well, it's human nature. So if those who are supposed to be elevated don't maintain an elevated position or fall down, we find even from the beginning, even in Satya Yoga sometimes there were fall downs, what to mention in Kali Yoga. But if it's philosophized, if you make some kind of justification, well, it's human nature, so it doesn't really matter, and then there doesn't become any distinction between elevated or fallen. There's no ideal to strive for. The sannyas ashrama becomes just a farce. So it should be clearly understood that certain activities are elevated and certain are fallen. And elevated persons who are trying to be ideal, it's not that they can just do anything and act in a fallen way, and that should be considered acceptable. Of course, there is that example. Nityananda Prabhu may go to a wine shop, but then you have to see what's he going for. There must be some purpose. If you see someone who's considered elevated and he's brawling, boozing, fornicating, using all these... Carousing? You got me there. Just moving around.
Loosely associated with...
I see. Yeah. Boozing, brawling, they three go together? Oh, well, I didn't know that. I learned an Americanism along with momentarily. So, if that's considered normal, and if he just goes, if they just do that all the time and at the same time try to pretend that they're an ideal to follow, then where's the ideal? The ideal means one should be free from the gross activities that others engage in. Therefore, Vacho vegam, manasa krodha vegam, jiva vegam, udara pasto vegam, etan vegan yo vishahed hadhira sarvamapi mam pridiving sashishat. One who's controlled the bestial urges, such a person is fit to guide others. But if they themselves are engaged in these activities, how can you guide others? How can you guide others up to an ideal if you yourself are not on that level? So, if one who's clearly ideal by his behavior, on a rare occasion exhibits some behavior which appears to be bestial, it should be understood that that is not his character, that is not his actual character. It may be that he's doing so for a purpose, just like the Nityananda, if he goes in a wine shop, it must be to do something for the benefit of the people in there, not that he's going to get drunk himself. Or it may be, there's also possible that someone may have a slip or a temporary fall down. That's also apichet sudaracharo ma bhajate mam ananya bhak sadhureva samantavya. It may be, but still such a person is considered to be saintly because of his general disposition. And if there is very rarely, very occasionally a slip, then that is not considered a slip because of his determination to ananya bhajan, to worship Krishna without any deviation. But if someone who's in an elevated position goes on performing sinful activities, then he's not in an elevated position, because elevated means above all these things. Or if he tries to justify that, that's also very dangerous. And then others who are also striving for the ideal, to strive for the ideal means to take some difficulty. It's not such an easy thing to be free from illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, intoxication. So if someone comes along and says, well, actually you can get Krishna prema without, you can still do all these sinful activities. You can still get Krishna prema. I think, well, that's very good. Or I'll just give you my blessing. Then you can get Krishna prema. You don't have to do all these difficulties. And then we may think, that's very good. It's troublesome to follow all these rules and regulations. If you can get Krishna prema without it, then why not? But we should know that this is cheating. Elevated means above all these gross tendencies. So one has to strive for the ideal. If one doesn't, then he's fallen. There is a difference between elevated and fallen. Hare Krishna. Any question, please, about this? Yeah.
Guru Maharaj, regarding the eating of meat and killing animals, we find the story in Srimad Bhagavatam of Puranjana, who after being dragged out of his body, in other words, after he died, he had to face all the animals that he righteously sacrificed killed in sacrifices. And it seems like the message there is that even if you do it so-called righteously, it's still implicated.
Yep, that's true. Well, one has to kill as a kshatriya. If one can go overboard, it can be intoxicating. It can be an addiction to see the animal writhing in pain and the feeling of power. So one can become that I can kill others. So if one does a little bit more than is required, it becomes sinful. Or if one does it in the consciousness of causing pain to others, it also becomes sinful. But even the pious activities in this world, this is a very important point that you've brought out by this question, that even piety in this world is inextricably mixed with sinfulness. All the piety, unless it's done for the sake, anything done for any motive other than to please Krishna, is inextricably mixed with sinfulness, because the actual definition of sin is to act in any way than that which is pleasing to Krishna. So even the piety in this world is actually all sinfulness. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, this sarvarambha hidoshena, all activities, in all undertakings in this world, that would be like a literal translation of arambha in this, right? Undertaking, something that you begin to do. So they all have some fault in them. In other words, as long as one is in this, whatever you do in this world, you cannot avoid that there must be some fault in it, but you shouldn't cease to act on that basis. If you think, whatever I do, there'll be some fault, therefore I won't do anything. But not doing anything is also a fault. So you can't avoid faultiness. The only way one can avoid fault is if one's activities are completely dedicated for the service of Krishna, knowing what Krishna wants one to do. So that's the underlying motto of this whole section of Bhagavatam, where Krishna is giving the apparently radical understanding that there's apparently seems to say that there's no intrinsic difference between sinfulness and piety. But there isn't. If one is thinking how to please oneself instead of thinking how to please Krishna, then even pious activities are sinful in the intrinsic sense. But if one is thinking how to please Krishna, then if one is trying to please Krishna, then generally that one will not perform activities which are ordinarily considered sinful. But even if one does so, then that is the highest piety. Yes, please.
Just a quick question. As you were describing so many different, what we could call dharmic puzzles, which is pious, which is wrong, which is right, which is wrong. I kept thinking of that dramatic scene in the Sabha of the Mahabharata. You know, when Yudhishthira gambled everything away, and did they really have a right to disrobe Draupadi because who owned her? You know, that whole thing.
Yeah, it's a complex question. Who owns? When Yudhishthira had gambled himself away, then how could he gamble Draupadi away? Because does he still have a right of property? All these complex questions come up.
My question involves kind of in that a little something different, because I just thought of this. Was Yudhishthira's determination to constantly gamble, even though it was obviously being cheated, was that an instance similar to this thing of telling the truth no matter what, or his refusal to tell the truth, and therefore on the battlefield with the Ashram, was that an instance of being? Would you say it from this perspective? Would be fault? Was that a fault in it?
You're asking me if Yudhishthira's going on gambling, seeing the terrible consequences, and even after everything was given back to him, then he went back and they said, hey, we're going to have another gambling match. He went back the next day, wasn't it, or a week, or just shortly afterwards, and gambled everything again away. Yeah. So, was he doing it? Well, he said it's a Kshatriya's dharma, you cannot refuse if you're challenged to a gambling match. He himself, at the time of marrying Draupadi, said to Drupada that when the pros and cons of one woman being married to 5 men, and in Drupada's mind there was no pro, it was all con. That was being discussed. But Yudhishthira, he offered as evidence that, well, it seems right to me, and no unrighteousness can come in my mind, therefore it must be right. That kind of evidence shouldn't be offered by anyone and everyone. It could lead to a lot of problems. I feel it's right, therefore it must be right, because I'm so pious. No. Was it an instance, something like Arjuna being bewildered on the battlefield for the sake of the Mahabharata to be spoken? That's also a possibility. It's hard. I would think that different commentators may give different reasons. Certainly, Krishna's will was that Krishna had a desire that this battle come about for the sake of vinashayata dushkritam, for killing all the demons. So it may be like that also. But one has to be a very elevated devotee to pass judgment or to suggest such things.
Well, we'll take your word as the final word since you're so elevated.
Oh, yeah.
It may be like that.
I am elevated, it's true. I'm sitting above you all. Now I am an elevated devotee. I'm about to fall down to my usual position. Which goes to show, you don't become elevated simply by sitting on a big seat and talking big words. Yeah, there's another question.
From this example, we see how Krishna is protecting desire for other women to annihilate the demons, but at the same time, he withdrew the Yaga family and allowed demonic Kali Yuga to progress.
Krishna protected Mother Bhumi by killing all the demons. Then he allowed the Yadu dynasty to kill themselves, mutual slaughter, and then Kali Yuga entered. Krishna's will is inscrutable. He did what he had to do, but anyway, Kali Yuga was entering.
And he came as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, so he's still looking out for us.
Very difficult to understand everything exactly. And even the desire to understand everything down to the last detail it's an anartha actually. That's also an anartha, which we could, heck, it's an anartha. Right? Should keep that one.
Very esoteric word.
We should keep that for the next, for next week. I think you're indicating that it's time to finish, is it? Yeah, alright, so we shall do so. Otherwise we may get involved in sinful activities.